everybody. Hope you're doing well. What I wanted to share today is something that I've had on my list to do for a while, and it is answer questions that I have gotten from you all about the work I do, how I organize my studio, things like that. So today's going to be sort of a Q&A, and then in addition to that, if you have other questions, leave them in the comments and I can do them in a future video as well. So I just got back from my retreat in Taos that I talked about in the last video. And it was everything I expect and hope that it will be for the fourth year in a row. It was just very inspiring, and the women are just wonderful. The weather felt great. I felt fall in the air in Taos, which fall is my favorite. And one of the things that I did, and I think I mentioned this in the last video, is I worked on my mushroom quilt idea that was a seed planted probably 3 years ago now by a friend of mine who had an antique mushroom quilt that she had pictures of. What was very interesting to me about that quilt, aside from the fact that it's improvisational, it feels really happy and fun, the mushroom caps were all done as one piece. So one piece cap sewn to one piece background. So that's a pretty steep curve. It's almost like the shape of a sleeve. I really liked the way that looked because I think it would have a totally different look if those mushroom caps were to have been cut into two curved pieces that you attach together once you sewed the background to each of those curved pieces, if that makes sense. I liked that it was all one fabric because then if you used a print or a plaid or something like that, you weren't breaking the pattern in the mushroom cap, which I thought was kind of cool. So I wanted to try it. I didn't really have a plan other than I needed to decide which fabrics I was going to bring with me. And I brought my small but lovely collection of Japanese taupe prints. Now, I talked about Japanese taupe quilts in my book, Wisecraft Quilts. Neutrals, browns, tans, brownish grays, things like that. To me, those colors sound like the area in Taos that I was going to be in. So that just seemed like a fun collection to play with since I usually play with super bright colors. I did 15 blocks and this is what I have. And I'm so happy with how they turned out. Each mushroom cap is one continuous piece. It's like a half circle, and I cut them two at a time. So I would take two fabrics, both of them face up, and I would just take a small rotary cutter and cut an arc. They aren't very precise. They're kind of improvisational, and I just love the way that they came together. There is probably a lot more geometry involved than I was interested in pulling together for this quilt. I did the arcs and the background piece, and then I decided that each of the blocks, which this is a block right here, would be, I think it was 10 inches trimmed, 9.5 inches sewn. Once I did this, once I made the top part, and then I made the stem, which are all different lengths, as you can see, and widths, and added pieces to either side of those. Then I decided if I needed to add a strip, like this yellow strip here, of another fabric to make the block a 10-inch block, then I did that. So sometimes I would add it, like here I added it on the side, and then I added it on the bottom. Here I just added it on the side. For this one here, I didn't need to add any to it. But I'm so happy with the way it came out. And I think what I love most about it is it reminds me of being in Taos and having this time at this retreat to just play. The other thing that I did while I was there, we walk from our rooms to the studio. It's a short walk, but you're making that walk several times a day. I had a little black bag about this big with this strap to carry my phone in over my shoulder. And the strap wasn't quite long enough for it to be crossbody without the phone ending up here. And the actual little bag itself was not quite large enough to put my room key and my phone in it. I could only fit my phone. So I made another one. And this was just, again, fabrics that I had with me at the retreat. I came home and finished it with a little press-on plastic snap that I got at the Japanese dollar store. I made some self-fabric handles, and these actually are a little longer than I want, so I think I'll probably trim them down a little bit. But now I can fit a key and my phone in it, and I thought it turned out really cute. So I hand quilted it, which hand quilting was something I wanted to work on while I was there. My hand quilting is by no means precise, even skilled in any way. That was another fun little project that I did. And the last thing I did while I was there is, I think I told you guys about the Tramp art stool that I got on eBay that I wanted to make a new cover for. And I actually made the cover. This is it. And it's hand quilted. Again, I wanted to play with hand quilting, so it's hand quilted. And now I just have to figure out how to put it on the stool. So I've been looking at YouTube videos and trying to decide if I want to attempt it myself or if I want to just turn it over to a professional. So anyway, I would say the week was a success. And then I came home for not even 24 hours, and then I went teaching again. So now I am back, reset the studio. I hate to leave the studio in a mess, but sometimes it's unavoidable. I literally took the clothes and the materials out of my suitcase from the retreat and put in quilts and more clothes for going to teach on the East Coast. I came home, I cleaned everything up. With that, let's switch gears to our Q&A. So I had several questions about fabric. How do I sort fabric in my studio? By color, size, project type, etc. I tend to sort by color if it is fat quarters, and I put them in a bin by color. So for example, it's kind of funny that I pulled out a solid green one, but here are solid green fabrics. So each of these is a fat quarter. I have them folded something like this. I used to put an acid-free card in each of these. That was a big thing to do for a while. And what I realized was I don't need to keep the acid-free card in there. Once I fold it, I can remove it, just like they used to do at the Gap when they would fold things. You fold it on a board, you remove the board, you fold the next thing. These are IKEA bins, and they go into an IKEA shelving unit called the Kallax, Kallax. I went to IKEA not terribly long ago to see if they had more of these bins, and they did not. However, if you are interested in looking at the Kallax shelving system, I am sure that they make tons of different things that will fit into those openings. So the way that I have it set up is that I have 2 of these in each opening of the unit. I think that means 2. So I have 28 bins. And the reason I have some that are natural and some that are black is because one of the last times I ever saw the bins like these, they didn't have any more natural. They only had black. So I got enough black to make a whole row. If I have fabric that is above and beyond what will fit into these bins, it's time to either make some quilts or do some purging. Right now, at this time in the studio, it's probably time to do a little of both. Which leads me to another question that I had, which was, how do I approach purchasing fabric? I don't purchase a lot of fabric, and it's not because I am given a lot of fabric from fabric companies. I am not. The type of quilts that I make, being scrappy, color value based, they don't require a lot of yardage of any fabric. So I tend to buy fat quarters. I do buy most of my fabric online. If I can find a fat quarter and purchase it that way, I'll do it that way. If they don't sell fat quarters, I will buy a half a yard. When it comes in, I'll fold it up and put it with the fat quarters, and that'll give me 2 fat quarters. If I'm going to buy a half a yard, I want to make sure I really like it. Sometimes that's the deciding factor. If I like it enough for a fat quarter, but not enough for a half a yard, if that makes sense. I try to be super picky. I used to come across a print that I fell in love with. I loved it so much that I could see it as the back of a quilt, for example, I would buy 3 yards. 3 yards would usually create most of a backing of a throw size quilt. I could piece some of the fabrics from the front on the back. So the next question was how to determine which scraps are worth saving. That's a really good question because I think we all grapple with that. I think that if you have found fabric, on your travels, if you've ordered something online that you really, really like and you have a little bit left over, you're reluctant to get rid of it. I have come up with a system. If any of you have ever made anything for my quilt patterns, you know that I always ask you to cut all your fabric first. And then if there is like a flying geese unit or a half square triangle unit that is used throughout the blocks or the pattern, I ask you to make all of those first. And that is all because we are creating a system through making the quilt to limit our choices and focus on color value, limit our choices on color. We usually end up having some of those units left over. For example, here are some 5-inch half square triangle units that I have left over from a previous project, and they go into this bin here, which is just for scraps and leftovers. And I will also include leftover 5-inch squares. I have a stack for 4.5-inch, same thing, 4-inch, 3.5-inch, 3-inch, and then I think the smallest I keep is 2-inch. Keep them all, and this is pretty messed up right now because I just ended up throwing a bunch of units in here recently, but it all goes in here and it's all divided by size. When I go to make my next quilt, if I see that I am going to need 3.5-inch half square triangle units that have a dark and a light color value in them, I'll go look in here and see if I have any that I can throw into the mix of what I'm making. Sometimes I look through here so much that I get a little tired of some of these fabrics. I just feel like I see them over and over again. I'm pretty ruthless about just giving them away, just passing them along to somebody who they would feel new to. Any tips on purchasing low volume fabrics or patterned neutrals? I think for me, a lot of my fabrics tend to be medium range because I'm drawn to the all-purpose feel of a seemingly medium range fabric. I feel like I can use it in a lot of different things, but it's important to have a variety of low volume or light fabrics as well as darks in addition to that as well. And the way that I usually go about that, it's if I see something that feels like a good low volume fabric, I definitely hang on to it, and I tend to keep those low volume fabrics together in my stash. This is a Denise Schmidt print that I believe was in my last quilt pattern dash. I think this was in there. And I thought, this isn't really low volume, but it could be a light value. Whereas this fabric here, it's definitely more of a low volume, but both of these can work as light values in the work that I do. I don't actively look for a ton of low volume fabric. If something catches my eye, we'll look at the color first, and then I'll think, could I use that in something? Like, here's a low volume fabric, and this was actually a men's shirting. A lot of men's shirtings for me. My husband came in here the other day to iron a shirt because he was going on a trip. This shirt here, which is like a pin dot, it's like a J. Crew shirt, and I don't know how he got this dirt spot on the back of it. Dust, or I don't know what that is. So he left it here for me because I will cut this up and use it. I love pin dots of any kind. So that's a good low volume for me. I thought this was a really funny one because this just goes to show you think you make sense, and then all of a sudden you realize they don't know what I'm talking about. This was one that I got in the comments on one of my videos asking, what exactly is chicken scratch embroidery? And I realized I probably mention it, but don't ever talk that much about it. And those of you that know me as primarily a quilt maker may be not aware of what chicken scratch is. So chicken scratch embroidery is a vintage hand embroidery technique that is done on gingham. I have seen quilts done with blocks that have chicken scratch embroidery on them, and I have also seen aprons. Maybe you've seen aprons in a thrift store or an antique shop made of gingham with some stitching on there. That is called chicken scratch embroidery here in the United States. It does have other names in other countries, and there's different versions of it all over the world. There's no real, at least that I have found, definitively written history about chicken scratch. Everything I've read says that the reason we call it chicken scratch embroidery is because somebody early on decided that the stitches look like chicken feet prints in the dirt of the chicken coop. So I've just continued to call it that. I fell in love with chicken scratch embroidery in 2020 when we moved from Seattle to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and we were building my now studio, which I am in. I didn't have a place to work. It was also a very stressful time with moving, the pandemic, and everything else. And I not only enjoyed stitching and learning about chicken scratch embroidery, I felt that it was very calming and very meditative. I love it. I probably stitch something on gingham every single night after I close up the studio for the day. I am currently running a block of the month quilt made of chicken scratch blocks called Gridline. I think we're in our 7th month. I just love it. I will be teaching it online on September 25th, 2025 for Tatter out of New York City. But I will have an online class. It's part of their World Embroidery series, and I will leave information in the description box. I will be sharing my collection of chicken scratch, my antique and vintage chicken scratch, as well as I will be teaching you the foundational stitches and weaves to make chicken scratch, which is so easy and fun to customize, to make your own. So I'll also be sharing all of that. So if you are interested, join us for one of those things. Then I got another question along the lines of embroidery. How do I keep track of all of the threads I use in my embroidery? eternal issue, right? I used to keep them in literally a bin. It was terrible. I would just throw them in a bin. And if it got tangled, I just wouldn't use that color. My husband, who is an artist, saw this bin, and one day he bought me this art bin. And I think it's literally from the company Art Bin. If I can find it online, I will link to it. You open the lid, and inside you have individual little bins, and I just keep things kind of divided by color-ish. So for example, you know, here's all my purples and purple adjacent colors and things like that. So some of them are so thick, like my blues are so thick that this bin will not stay closed. It keeps popping open. But if I put them in here, it will stay closed enough so that they won't come out. So this is kind of what I use, and this holds all of my 6-strand embroidery floss, which is the majority of what I use for chicken scratch. I have recently discovered hand-dyed 6-strand embroidery floss on Etsy, which is like my new favorite obsession. I have all of these little, I don't know what you call these, they're used in lace making, but I just wind the skeins around here and I keep them in this box, and I just pull out what I need. And I mean, aren't these colors just so pretty? It's not like variegated thread, because variegated thread has a definite repeat, a short repeat between colors or a longer repeat between colors. Hand-dyed thread, you kind of get what you get. And I'm sure that probably something like these colors are very popular for, this would be like landscapey types of, you know, stitching and things like that because of all the colors. Actually, I think this one's called the Shire. I love the color. But I like to use it for chicken scratch embroidery because I just like the color changes. I think they're really fun. I used to have a lot of pearl cotton thread, but I don't use that very much anymore either. I have all of that together in a bin. And then my sewing thread, I use Aurifil, and I keep that all together in bins in a drawer as well. I don't have my thread out and visible on a thread rack for the same reason that I don't leave my embroidery floss out on a thread rack. We are at 6,000 feet of elevation, and the sun is intense, and it will fade or degrade things that are left out indefinitely, like threads. So I keep them in a dark place. It's one of the reasons I also keep my fabric in bins away from the sun. It is amazing how quickly things fade in this kind of intense sunlight. That's kind of how I do it. And the last question is, someone wanted to know how I began quilting. And I thought that would be a good one to end on, because I have never talked a lot about my background and what led me to quilting, and I won't make it a super long story, but I majored in fashion merchandising and design when I went to college, and I believe that my degree is called Human Environmental Sciences. I wanted to work for clothing designers, and I did that, which I can talk about that in another video. I did that in the corporate world for several years, learned so much. I mean, so much. It was such an amazing career. I loved it. It was super high pressure. I was living in North Carolina. The textile industry was pretty vibrant and full in North Carolina. And it's kind of sad because a lot of it's gone now. But from there, that moved us to Seattle. I took a job that was offered to me in Seattle. We moved there, and I did that job for 2 years, 3 years. And then I decided we both decided once I had my oldest child, who's now almost 28, that I didn't feel like I could do both very well because the fashion industry is super high pressure, at least the environments that I was in. I didn't feel like I could do both very well. And we did not have any family close to us in Seattle. So we made the decision that I would stay at home with Emma. I'm not going to say that it was easy for me. That is a very, very hard job, but I valued the time that I did. I still loved fabric. I still loved the stories, the images that were evoked from looking at an old piece of fabric, for smelling an old piece of fabric. The way that I discovered I could express myself was through quilting. I always joke that when I was in the apparel industry, we had sample sewers who, if we were having a fit session, we could ask them, could you like reshape this sleeve? Could you add another button? Could you like round the neckline a little bit more? They would leave, and within 15 minutes, we had the revised garment before the fit model left. So I always felt like I could never do that. I felt like I'd seen the ultimate of construction and things like that, which of course, you know, I could if I tried, but maybe not that fast. But I felt like patchwork was something that I could express myself with, and I really liked it. And I really liked the idea of patchwork as storytelling, as preserving old fabrics. And I think that's why I was drawn to quilt making. I wasn't as drawn to quilts that had lots of negative space and lots of solid fabrics. It was more the prints and the patterns and the mixture of all of them together and what it represented. And actually the first quilt that I ever made was a quilt from my daughter's baby clothes. It wasn't a very good quilt, but I really loved the process of, it was sort of like a photo album. Putting all those fabrics together told a story for me. That's kind of how I started. I grew more and more into quilting. After that, as my kids got older, I had a whole other side of freelance work that I did for a photographer in Seattle that involved making projects from supplies I found at the thrift store that had hired us. And I loved doing that I did that for about 3 years in total, I think. But I don't know how people who, like content creators who create a lot of different projects and DIY things, I don't know how they do it, because I remember at one point I was looking around our house in Seattle, and I had DIY projects in various stages all over our house, and it just made me a little bit crazy. And I realized then this is probably not something sustainable long term for me. So what I liked about quilt making is that fabric is flat, you can collect it, you can be drawn to it, you can pass it on, you can pick different prints and put them together and tell a story in a quilt. Honestly, that has never stopped appealing to me. I really, really enjoy the whole process of quilt making, of combining all sorts of different fabrics, of figuring out like a wonky mushroom block. I love it. I think it's super fun. Thank you all so much for your enthusiasm for my channel and for tuning in. I post videos every other week. I am having a really good time. So thank you for following along. I really try to answer all the comments because I love the back and forth that occurs when we all sort of talk to each other. And if there's something that you would like to know more about, I'll collect questions for a future Q&A. And I hope to see you very soon. Take care for now.